Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to another episode of the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. I'm your host, Kevin, out of Falcoholic. Kevin, we are here to continue our roster review series with defensive tackle. It's a group that has actually not had a ton of turnover, but will likely look very, very different in 2025 than it did in 2024 because, of course, the legend himself, Grady Jarrett, was released for cap savings, and it was a lot of cap savings, so I can understand why they did it. And now we have a lot of not necessarily new faces, but new guys stepping into roles because last year the Falcons took two defensive tackles, well, technically three. One of them is already off the roster. They tried to sneak him onto the practice squad. That did not work. They have two defensive tackles remaining from last year's three defensive tackle class that didn't really play much at all, right? And I'm referring to, of course, Ruke Orhorhoro and Brandon Dorlus, who seem to be slated for significant roles this year, which is great to see. We also had some other additions and some returns from guys that have been with the team in the past. So I think the group will look different. It will also play very differently because Jeff Ulbricht's defense is not going to look a whole lot like Jimmy Lake's defense, and that's a good thing for all of us. So we're going to get into this group, talk about the projected starters, who I think is going to be there. The title kind of gives it away, but, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about the primary depth guys, the rotational guys, what type of roles we might be seeing on this defense in terms of 3 tech, in terms of 5 tech. How are these guys going to split snaps? Where are they going to play? All that great stuff. We're going to get into that on today's show. So buckle up. Before we do, I want to bring you guys a quick word from our sponsor, BetOnline. Folks, BetOnline continues to be your number one source for all your sports betting action. And with baseball in full swing and football season literally now just around the corner, it's less than 2 weeks until training camp kicks off for the Falcons. BetOnline's got more ways than ever to stay on the action with the latest odds, news, and scores, even live in-game betting options. And, of course, you can bet NFL futures right now, but they've also got, like I said, MLB going, UFC, tennis, and, of course, I'm sure there will be preseason betting for all of you preseason degenerates out there that want a live bet or just bet the preseason. I'm sure BetOnline will hook you up. And in between games, you can also head over to BetOnline's online casino with all the top Vegas-style games, including poker, blackjack, live slots, all that good stuff. So what are you waiting for, folks? Head to that website today. It's betonline.ag to take advantage of their industry-leading VIP program with level-up bonuses, weekly cash boosts, and other perks. And when you sign up, be sure to use our promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV to get access to the latest promotions. BetOnline, the game starts here. And just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started here, reminding folks that Adnan and I will be on site for training camp. Adnan will be there for the first 2 weeks, so shout out to Adnan crushing that coverage. I'm coming in from out of town. I will be there for the first, I believe, 4 practices, and we will also be bringing back our Falcons fan gathering, which is going to be happening at Firemaker Brewing in West Midtown. I will be sure to put a link to that. We're going to be, blasting that. It was just sort of agreed to and announced. It's going to be on Saturday, July 26th, starting at 6 p.m. We will be attempting to do a live show or a live taping or at least something fun there. But most of the night, we'll just be hanging out. We'll be chatting you guys up, getting to know the fans of the channel, getting to know some other Falcons fans, and just giving you guys a space to drink some great beer. I love Firemaker. Was super excited to be able to set this up with them. And we're just going to have a great time and get to know some fellow Falcons fans. So we look forward to seeing you guys there. Hope everybody can make it. And we will, of course, be trying to do a live stream as well. So if you can't make it or you're way out of town, then hopefully you can be there in spirit with us while we record, and we'll try to have a fun time with that. On to, of course, the actual Falcons content tonight. Defensive tackle should have been the strongest group or close to the strongest group on defense last year. And it really was a big standout back in 2023 with Ryan Nielsen. So the drop-off in 2024 that was kind of just unexpected and really didn't make a lot of sense from any angle was shocking, right? To see Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata, who were one of the best interior duos in the NFL when they were healthy in 2023, go to just being average at best, and worse at times. The rest of the group looked poor. The Falcons didn't seem to have a plan to get second-round pick Ruke Orhorhoro on the field. They didn't really get fourth-round pick Brandon Dorlus on the field at all. Kentavious Street played too much. I think Street is a fine rotational guy, no, not meaning any slander against Kentavious Street, but like it was way too much. They didn't have a nose tackle. They just didn't Eddie Goldman was the nose tackle, but he wasn't really defending the run. He was actually their best pass rusher, which love Eddie Goldman, but wasn't really what they were expecting there. So the whole group as a whole just super underperformed expectations. And I think a lot of that, obviously, when an entire group underperforms relative to expectation, and it's not just one or two guys, it's typically coaching and it's typically the defensive scheme to some extent. The Falcons have a new defensive line coach. They have a new defensive coordinator. They're going back more in a Nielsen direction. This is not going to be a Nielsen defense, but it is going to be more of that 4-3 base look. There will still be stand-up rushers. It's going to be a hybrid front, all that good stuff. But I think we will see more sort of 4-3 looks and more deployment of these guys in an attacking style defense as opposed to that 3-4 philosophy of more read and react and tying up multiple blockers, with 2, 3, 4 defensive ends and all that. We're not doing that. It didn't really work. The whole defense didn't really work. We're not going to linger on that. We talked about that all offseason. We've got a lot of shows about that. You can go back and watch if you want. But I think one of the most important camp battles, and shout out to our show that we did on Wednesday with the Falcoholic himself, Dave Choate. You can go check that out on the channel as well. Defensive tackle opposite David Onyemata, or perhaps two defensive tackles if the Falcons do end up releasing Onyemata at some point for cap savings. They could save almost $9 million at this point, which, makes sense from that angle, but they also don't have a lot of guys in the wings. They got a lot of unproven talent right now. So in one way it would be shocking to keep him, and one way it would be shocking not to keep him. So curious to see what happens there. But for now, Onyemata's on the roster. We're going to pencil him into one starting spot. So between one and two other starting spots are up for grabs. The Falcons will probably play a nose tackle occasionally, especially against like run-heavy opponents. But for the most part, they're probably going to play a shade nose and a 3-tech, maybe a couple maybe like a 2-3 techs in some sort of pass rush specialist situations. They may play some 4-eye, have guys play 4-eye sometimes in sort of more 3-4 looks if they want to get two stand-up rushers on the field. There's a lot of ways they could deploy this, but I think for the most part, there's going to be two interior defensive linemen on the field on most snaps. I think it will be less of the 3 interior defensive linemen that we saw a lot last year under Jimmy Lake. So in that regard, thanks Windows for blowing up my stream. In that regard, there's at least one starting spot up for grabs. And I'm going to kind of separate this chart, like in this group, into like maybe 3 positions, right? So I'll say that there's sort of like your 3-tech pass rush specialist, more penetration focused guy. So that 3-tech role, and then maybe like a 1-tech or a shade nose role. And then so those two I think are the main roles, although the Falcons are probably going to mix and match to some degree, right? But David Onyemata is probably going to be playing more of that like shade nose role. I think that was how he started his career, and I think that's possibly a good role for him again in this style of defense. The question is, who else is playing that role, and who's going to start next to him doing more 3-tech stuff. And I think Ruke Orhorhoro is the obvious candidate, right? I think Orhorhoro has the run defending chops to play right away and not be a liability. With Orhorhoro, it was always, can he take the next step with his pass rush plan, polish, moves, all that stuff to be able to play reliably on third downs or in pass rush situations. And I think the idea should hopefully be that he can, because they desperately need him to be that guy. And Ruke Orhorhoro, like if you see him on the practice field, I hope guys will be able to see him at training camp. Like Orhorhoro, you can see why teams valued him. The Falcons were not the only team to value him super high, because physically he's got everything you want. He's huge. He's super long in terms of, he's got over 34-inch arms, which for an interior defender is like super high percentile. He's built really well. He's explosive. He moves well. He can stand up. This athletically and physically speaking, there's not really limitations there. He does have to play with better leverage. He's got to get his pad level down. That's always an issue for these taller interior defensive linemen. But because of his length, he's just an exceptional run defender, even if guys can sometimes get under his pads, because he can just lock them out, and he has a large tackle radius. And I think when he gets his hands on somebody, he's a great tackler, doesn't miss a lot of tackles. So I think the Falcons are going to want to get him out there as much as they can. And sort of, I think everyone wants that to happen. Fans, front office, coaching staff. So I think at this point, it's Orhorhoro time. And Orhorhoro, I wouldn't be shocked if he plays the most snaps of any interior defensive lineman for the Falcons. I think that would be the best case scenario because he's got a sky-high ceiling. We need to start seeing it this year, and he needs to be given a role. And if it looks like he's not ready for that role, or maybe he needs to just play on early downs to start out, that's fine, but he needs to be playing. There's no question about that. In terms of other guys at 3-tech specifically, I think we can look down the depth chart to Morgan Fox. I think Morgan Fox, very good veteran pass rusher. He's a pass rush specialist, not going to do much against the run. He's not like hopeless against the run, but he's not the guy you're having in there on like 3rd and 1 or goal line. That's just not his game. He can make tackles, he can penetrate and get in the backfield and do stuff, but he's not a hold your ground, take on a double team, and that's not his game. He's going to split gaps, he's going to shoot into the backfield, he's going to cause pressure, and he's a guy that does create sacks and pressures. Like that is his game. I think he's going to be a nice boost to be able to rotate in pass rush situations. He just doesn't offer you much as an early down player. But I think, we could easily see early in the season that Ruke Orhorhoro, Morgan Fox rotation where Ruke is playing initially. And then if it gets to more a pass rush, like a 3rd and long or something like that, Morgan Fox might rotate in to give a fresh set of legs out there for the Falcons to rush the passer. I also think if we see like double 3-tech looks like we used to see Quinn do a lot, we might see, Fox and Orhorhoro or some of these other guys get out there and just have 2 guys pass rushing with like a linebacker lined up over the center, like Caden Ellis. Great spot, great look. You love to see that. Caden Ellis is very dangerous as a blitzer. Teams have to respect that. So, I think Morgan Fox is another guy that's likely to play quite a few snaps from that 3-tech spot. Other guys, like I think Brandon Dorlus is another guy that's an obvious candidate to play 3-tech. He has bulked up to close to 300. I believe he's at like 295 or 298 according to the Falcons site. And if you'll remember from when Brandon Dorlus was drafted, he was sort of that tweener build. Now he was, I think, much closer to interior weight than edge rush weight, but Dorlus is an impressive athlete for that size. He was a stand-up edge rusher at times for Oregon. He also kicked inside and played all over the defensive line. He can kind of play wherever. I think his best role, he's very strong. I think, again, he can be a guy that can be an asset on early downs and be a good pass rusher. I think that Dorlus is an obvious fit for that 3-tech role. I don't think he's ever going to be big enough to play actual nose tackle, but if they're going for that shade nose penetration style player a la Grady Jarrett, when he first started his career, he could play there. I think that's the nice thing I think about both Ruke and Brandon Dorlus is that they're both sort of alignment versatile. They can play 4-eye as well. If you're going for those looks, they can play 3-tech, they can play 1. I think Dorlus in particular might see some time at 5-tech, sort of rotating with Zach Harrison for that in that big end spot. You'll remember guys like Red Bryant for the Seahawks playing that role. Quinn had, I believe it was like Derek Shelby sort of playing that role and then kicking inside in pass rush situations. I think that's the kind of role that we're looking at for Dorlus, although I think Dorlus will probably play a little bit more inside, which is why I have him listed with the inside guys. And I think Harrison will mostly be playing edge. But again, Harrison has that same ability to kick inside if needed. But I think, again, probably going to see Harrison more of the edge, so I have him more with the edge rushers. We'll talk about him later. Dorlus more on the inside. But I think that's a nice thing about Dorlus. He's very alignment versatile. He has experience all over the place. You can kind of work him in as needed. And same thing with Ruke. So those are, I think, your top 3-tech guys. Onyemata at the 1 is maybe going to be your starter in most situations, but the Falcons did bring back LaCale London, who was a favorite rotational guy of mine under Ryan Nielsen, who I think was just a solid rotational player. He has bulked up back to his I think college weight where he played more nose tackle. He has bulked up to 330 per the Falcons website. I suspect that LaCale London will be the team's traditional 0-tech, 1-tech nose tackle for run-heavy assignments. And this might be a role that's not active every week, right? This might be a situation where LaCale London's active against Philadelphia. I don't even remember if the Falcons play the Eagles this year, but that type of offense, right? Washington, the teams that are going to line up in heavier sets or just try to run the ball a bunch, you'll probably have LaCale London active to give the Falcons that sort of burly, double team eating run stuffer in the middle that I'm not sure Onyemata is necessarily up to at his lower weight, or any of these other shade nose types. For some teams, I think the Falcons are going to want that big, beefy nose tackle to play on early downs and clog up the middle of the defense. And I think LaCale London bulking up has given them that. I think I haven't seen him play nose tackle in a long time, but I think he's just a solid player, and I think he'll be a solid nose tackle for this team. I expect him to make the roster in that specialized role. In terms of the other guys on this roster, backing that up, I think David Onyemata's, backup might be like Taquan Graham. I think that Graham is kind of similar to Ruke in some ways, in that he's also a very long, large interior defensive lineman, built almost more like a 5-tech or like an edge rusher in some ways. So Graham, I think, can play all over, and that's also why I expect him to stick around, because I think he'll probably back up a lot of guys and just be sort of a rotational option. I think he can play the 1-tech shade nose, even though he hasn't done a lot of that, but he can obviously play 3-tech and probably go all the way out to 4i or 5-tech as needed. And then there's a couple more guys on here. Contavious Street, this coaching staff seems to really like him. I think, they tried to play him at nose tackle in like that Jimmy Lake defense, and I don't think that was going very well. He's just not able to hold up there. I think Contavious Street is more in that like Dorlus role, where he's kind of that inside-outside player, or just more of a 3-tech pass rusher type. I could see him making the roster, but again, I don't know. I think he lacks the versatility that some of these other guys have, and I think that might lead to him being more of a practice squad guy. But the Falcons also brought in some other guys to compete here for the practice squad, right? With Junior Aho and Simeon Barrow Jr. Barrow Jr. is much more in that like Dorlus undersized role, although I think Dorlus actually isn't undersized now, but Barrow is. I think Barrow's like in the 280s and just a smaller guy. He's going to have a difficult road, but I think he is talented, and I wouldn't be surprised if he sort of shocks and is impressive in that specialized pass rushing role, carves out a practice squad spot for himself. With Junior Aho, not super sure about him, haven't seen him, but I do think he's an interesting player. The Falcons he's going to be able to compete here as well. I think he's more of a practice squad competitor than a 53-man roster guy, but I think he's an interesting name to watch as well. So he's someone to keep an eye on, to see if he can generate any excitement early in training camp, and maybe parlay that into a bigger role, especially if we can end up making the squad. That can open up opportunities, perhaps in the future for him. All right, so that is all the names. So my thoughts basically on this group as a whole, I kind of feel not as good about it as I did last year, but I think in a weird way, like the Falcons lost one of their legends. I thought I should have worn my Grady Jarrett jersey for this pod, but they lost a legend in Grady Jarrett, and yes, Grady Jarrett was getting towards the end of his career. His production had not, it was not worth the $20 million plus a year he was going to get. I don't blame him for not taking a pay cut. I also don't blame the Falcons for deciding they needed to move on. But it's tough to lose that leadership and veteran presence, and I think that's part of the reason why Onyemata is still here. They don't want to like jettison all of their veterans in one offseason, especially their veteran leaders. So I think that's a reason why we might see Onyemata stick around, unless he just looks bad in training camp or preseason or something like that, and they're like, all right, we just can't justify this cost. And the cost could also just be like, we can't justify this cost, right? That could obviously happen. But given that he's stuck around this long, I think the expectation should be that Onyemata's on the roster until we hear otherwise. So that's going to be my assumption. But I think this is a strong and deep sort of in the middle group. I think they've got a number of guys here that are all really good, like that you want on your roster. I think right now the question is like, are any of these guys like good enough to be a starter? Obviously the hope is that Ruke Orhorhoro will be that guy. Hopefully Brandon Dorlus can also be that guy. We know that Taquan Graham has been a very effective rotational player in the past. Last year was not a good season for him or anyone on this defensive line, really. But I like his potential to kind of come back in and just kind of fill whatever role they need. Morgan Fox, I think, is a very solid pass rush specialist. I think he will be a boost on third downs that the team didn't really have last year. They think they could have really used like Fox, I think, is like a pass rush specialist. He's going to come in. If they get an opportunity to sub, they're going to have Morgan Fox come on the field in those pass rush situations, and I think he'll pay dividends there. I think he might end up being kind of like a sleeper fan favorite where fans are going to be like, Morgan Fox should be playing more. Morgan Fox should... Part of his effectiveness, I think, will be that he's going to be protected from the early down work to some extent, and that they're going to try to keep him fresh for those critical situations. And I think hopefully they'll be able to do that because I think they've got a really potentially good setup here. I think Ruke should start and should be hopefully good this year. I'm really excited to see what he can do. I think he's one of the most interesting players on the defense going into this season. I think Dorlus is also a guy that's probably going to play and should play. We just kind of need to know what we got there. But these are two like basically total unknowns because we didn't really see a whole lot from them at all. And that was shocking considering how much draft capital was dumped into this position. I think those two guys are going to be critical to how this position group shakes out. Like, how good is Ruke? If Ruke is a good starter, I think this group could be pretty good. If he's not, and Dorlus also is not, then we're going to have problems. There's no way around that. My strong belief is that one of Ruke Orhorhoro or Brandon Dorlus will be starting caliber this year. I know all the money will be on Orhorhoro, and I think his floor as a run defender makes that pretty likely that he'll at least be a serviceable starter. But we want more, obviously, from a second-round pick that required a trade-up. And I think Dorlus, hopefully, he can just be that solid starter as he grows into like a full-time interior role and maybe play some 5-tech too. And then I think you've got, like I said, some good some good rotational players in Taquan Graham and Morgan Fox and Kale London to sort of fill out the rest of this rotation. And then that just, the guy that's left out here is David Onyemata. And I don't really know what to expect. I think if the Falcons thought he would look like last year's David Onyemata, probably not returning at this price point. My guess is the team feels strongly that the scheme and the coaching was to blame, which I respect that, hopefully they had some soul searching and were able to figure that out. I think Nate Ollie is a great defensive coach. He's one of those guys that's really on the come up, and I'm excited to see what he can do. But I think the belief is that Onyemata's got plenty left in the tank. We just need to get him and the rest of this group into a better system with some better coaching, and Onyemata can once again be an above average starter for us. And I think if you've got Onyemata playing like we should expect him to play at his price tag, along with Orhorhoro hopefully coming in his second year and making some noise, I think this could be a solid group and potentially better if these young guys take a step up. But I'm not worried about the position. I know like some people are like, well, who's playing next to Onyemata? Is Onyemata going to... There are a lot of question marks here, but I do think there's enough compelling options in this room that I'm not worried about it. And I think that at the end of the day, this will be a solid rotation. I don't know that it's going to be like earning any Pro Bowl nods necessarily, but I do think they'll be solid. It won't be a problem for this team. And I think they actually could be like decent. Like I think situationally they could be good. Like I think if like Kale London is what we hope and he's out there with Ruke and Zach Harrison, and they have this sort of run heavy front, maybe they can be a really good run defense. A lot of that's going to depend on linebacker, which we'll talk about later. But I think that is a consideration here. But I think ultimately this group is intriguing and solid at worst. Maybe that's a little too rosy. I'm trying not to overreact to what we saw last year, which obviously was not average. It was below average. That was a big shock and a big disappointment. I think this year things are looking better, and I'm encouraged about what we could see from this group in 2025. I think they will end up being a nice bounce back group that will not cause us to tear our hair out in any way, and we'll feel ultimately, I think, good about the direction of this group this season, even if it's not like good yet. Maybe if it's just solid, that would be a big step up from last year. And could really, I think hopefully we'll see the young guys here take a step forward, give us some hope. And then combining with the young guys in the edge room, hopefully this defensive line can grow together this year. Maybe by the end of the season, we're feeling pretty good about where these guys are at. That's my hope. And my other hope is that you guys enjoyed this episode. And if you did, thank you for watching. And also, please like and subscribe. That really helps the channel. We're trying to get to 10K subscribers. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. Really appreciate that. If you haven't left a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice, help us out there too. Really appreciate that as well. It really helps the algorithm. So thank you guys. If you want to support the show, thank you again. You could do so at Patreon, patreon.com/Falcoholic or in the YouTube channel memberships. And once again, want to thank our sponsor, BetOnline, for sponsoring today's episode. And then final word, come see us in Atlanta. We'd love to see you guys. Firemaker Brewing, Saturday, July 26th, 6 p.m. It's going to be a lot of fun. Hoping to get some other Falcons people there as well. We'll see how well that turns out. It's still very early, but we'll be announcing more details and more stuff in the coming days. But wanted to give you guys the earliest possible warning so you can request off work or make sure that you're in town or whatever. And it'll, of course, be on Back Together Saturday. So we're going to be getting back together with all of our local fans here in Atlanta. Excited to see you guys. So until next time, I'm Kevin Knight at Falcoholic Kevin. This has been the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. We'll see you guys. Have a great day, folks.